one of the things that I've been working on is a standardized way of building Quasar applications, or basically just building apps in general. And part of that is a project that I've been talking about quite a bit called VueModel. And I've been thinking lately, since VueModel is still in development, and my plan is to build a whole bunch of apps with VueModel. This is what it looks like to instantiate it. And by creating a bunch of apps with VueModel, it sort of gives me the chance to constantly add things onto the API. So it's not stable at the moment because I want to keep building apps and essentially conquering the problems that I have building those apps one at a time. And the cool thing about this is I can just sort of like tackle a lot of different problems. I'll give you an example of a couple of those. So one of the things I realized is I wanted to be able to have something like a project ID, which is what I have in this app. This is like a kind of like a Trello clone. And if I go to add project and I give it something like my team, and then you can go ahead and start adding boards. And this is where you select the project. And what I wanted to do is make it so that all of the boards, so we had a board here, and let's just call this first board. And then we can start adding some columns in here. Then we can say like first, second, and we can organize things like this just by dragging and dropping. And the same with, all the cards on that board as well. Right? So what I needed to be able to do was scope everything to the current project that is selected. And so this is an example of something where I thought, okay, I need to make sure that this is possible. I don't want to run into a situation where I can't do this because then I'll have to like update VueModel. I might have to make breaking changes for everyone, blah, blah, blah. And so, I quickly go into VueModel, implement it so that it's then possible. And the way this is implemented is we have this concept of scopes. And there's a scope called scope to project. And that uses a variable from local storage. So you can see here, it basically checks every single model and checks for a project ID field on that model. For example, we've got a card file, we've got a card, and it's got a project ID. So it goes, oh, I noticed that you have a project ID. Therefore, I'm going to add into a filter. So every time I try to get cards from now on, I'm going to add this filter in. So we create this scope, and then I have this other section with globally applied scopes. So by default, scopes aren't applied to anything, but now we're saying for every single model, I want to try and use this scope. And then if you run into something like a, I don't know, what's a good example of something that wouldn't be scoped? A user. So a user doesn't have a project ID. Therefore, this essentially just gets skipped and we return an empty object. So that was a feature that I really, really wanted. It's basically multi-tenancy. And I wanted to be able to very easily, you would actually usually do this on the back end, but I want to be able to prototype things on the front end. So all of this stuff is stored inside of IndexedDB. We've talked about this in previous videos. So they all basically get their own database. Here's all of our boards. Here's all of our cards. And then whenever a card is created, that project ID is automatically set. So it's really cool because as you're developing, you don't have to add this project ID every single time. You only set it when you actually need to. Anyway, I thought this was a really cool concept. And so I added it in. It was something that was required for me. And then the other thing I realized was, I need to be able to say whenever you're creating a project, it needs to use the project ID. Sorry, whenever you're creating a card or anything with a project ID, it has to add that ID field automatically. Otherwise, again, every time I create a card, let's jump into the card, I then have to manually set the project ID. Again, this is just like multi-tenancy, like having a tenant ID or an org ID. You want to be able to set it once, and then every time something is created, it automatically uses that ID. So now I've got the concept of hooks. And this is something that, this is an array of hooks. And the reason I made it an array, it's kind of hard to explain, but later on I want to be able to have plugins so that essentially you can have a whole bunch of hooks. Some might be from plugins, some might be ones that you define in your config, and they all merge together so that you can have multiple hooks. And here we're just saying, hey, do you have a project ID field? Right? We can see that we do. And therefore, I'm going to add on to the form a project ID. So we're hooking into every single model. And and basically, yeah, setting that project ID. You can do it by entity, but this is a way that we can basically globally add hooks. So now we've basically got quote unquote multi-tenancy, if you want to call it that. And we can very easily scope to the project ID, but then also create with a project ID. And now whenever I create a new project that has this concept, I want to be able to essentially make it so that these can be plugins. So I can take this concept of creating and then scoping for every time I'm getting that record, but then also creating. I want to take that concept and be able to turn it into a plugin. So this code and this code, I never have to write again. So those are kind of my thoughts. Like I want to be able to do this. Now, how do we make it as easy as possible so that my code can get even cleaner? And so, for example, if I jump into my use main layout, this is just a Pina store. That's how I name things. So rather than calling it a store, I just say use main layout. And then it's obvious to me that that's the thing for that store. I don't know, maybe I should call it a store, but that's what I'm doing for now. But essentially, you can see that when I create things, like with the boards creator, I don't have to pass it through. One thing you can do with this is say merge. And I could say, for example, merge, make that a computed. And then we would say project ID is equal to local storage dot, and you can do all of that. But now I don't have to write that code because it's already done in one place globally. Really, really cool stuff. So the point of all this is, since I'm doing this anyway, why don't I make a whole bunch of projects that that are basically just really simple, common things that people build, and then just do all of it using VueModel. And okay, a lot of you might know this, so let me just quickly point this out to add a bit of context. VueModel uses drivers, so this is all done using the local driver. But you can also have another driver. For example, I have one for Laravel, which is the Laravel Orion driver. And in order to do that, I'd basically just say Orion there, give it the driver, which would be like Orion driver or something like that. And essentially the backend is swappable. Now, it's not going to be 100% feature parity because some backends just don't have features that others do. For example, Strapi and Laravel Orion doesn't have selects, for example. They're probably going to add it very soon. So that means when I'm implementing this for Laravel Orion, I can't do selects, but Strapi does have selects. And therefore, I'm going to have a way to basically say, have something in the console that says, oh, the driver you're using doesn't support that feature that you're trying to use. And one of the other pros to that is you can even have very, very simple CRUD APIs. So maybe you want to use VueModel with something that can just create, update, index, delete, and it doesn't have any like nested indexing. It can't do like any advanced stuff. It's just a very simple CRUD API. In that case, you could do that and just remove and just not implement a bunch of the features, but you get to use the same beautiful API. An example of that would be Bluetooth. So maybe you have a Bluetooth device and you can do CRUD operations. But for example, maybe you can't do any filters when you're indexing stuff from that device. So you might say like, give me all the transactions from that device, but it doesn't support indexing. Then what you could do is have a driver for that device that you create that has very basic actions. But if you ever try and do like nested indexing or filters or stuff like that, it would just show a warning that says, sorry, that isn't supported on this API. So I've already kind of done that. If I control click into this, I believe I've got like a features section. Okay, maybe I haven't done it yet. Yeah, anyway, each driver is going to have its own set of features. So you can very easily use the same API, but then get warnings in the console whenever you try and use a feature that isn't supported in that API. I personally think it's like a really cool idea, but then again, that's why I'm creating it. Now, so basically what I was trying to say there is I can then create all of these little apps that use the user's computer as the database, but then you can then basically take the code for this app, use your own database. You might swap out the IndexedDB with Strapi, or you might swap it out with Supabase, or you might swap it out with Laravel. Those are the three ones that I want to start off with because I know that I can get the flexibility in the API that I need with those backends. But yeah, you can select your own backend, and then essentially everything that is built here will also work with that backend. You might have to do a little bit of configuring. For example, the stuff I was talking about with quote unquote multi-tenancy. So maybe, for example, rather than using local storage for the project, you would send the project ID as a header in your request. So you might have to do a little bit of tweaking here and there, but essentially, I can now give people starting points for applications, and then they can implement the backend themselves. And that's the idea that I essentially wanted to share here, which is, why not spend next year creating a whole bunch of these apps? I won't release VueModel as stable yet, which it hasn't been released as stable, and just keep doing this, keep updating VueModel, making changes. And then once we've made like about 20 apps is going to be my goal. Once I've built 20 apps where I'm thinking, okay, they're very basic implementations of those things, then I can start sharing it with the world. And let me just name some of these concepts I've got here. So one of them is called boards, which is basically a very simple Trello clone. And one of the things its goals was basically, let's see how we can do sortable with VueModel, and let's make sure that sorting stuff is very easy to do with VueModel. And that's one of the things where I made some changes. So basically, we have an array of IDs on the boards table, and when you switch these, it basically reorders them and saves the model. I know Trello does it slightly different to that, where everything's got a position ID, but I wanted something really simple. So whenever you change these, it's actually updating the board, not the card, in order to get that new order. So that's one of the things. Another one that I want to add is notes. So basically, just like Google Keep, I use Google Keep for all of my notes. I won't show you it on here just because I might have private stuff in there. A forum app, just a really basic forum app, that would be a great one, because imagine just building a really basic forum implementation with stuff you would usually see like tags, a chat box, stuff like that, an admin page. I could probably build that in 3 or 4 days using VueModel, because I don't have to think about the back end at all. So I could go ahead and build that. You can take the code and then use it with your own backend. Another one is Gallery, something like Google Photos. And this helps me with this other problem that I'm trying to do, which is using files. So IndexedDB, VueModel currently doesn't have the concept of files. And the idea is you would have another, you would have a model just for files. And then I would create some really nice composables to make it very easy to work with files. And then you can easily like swap out the driver that you use for your files. And that would be a great example of something that I would need to build in order to build Gallery. So yes, the idea is I would then build like a Google Photos, like a Gallery app, the hard way. So I would do it writing things custom. And then when I've hit all the problems, I can then create the projects that I need to make that even easier to do. Another one is Markdown, which is basically implementation of HackMD. If you haven't checked out HackMD, check that out. A chat app, so a really basic chat app that's very, very easy to do with VueModel. But one thing I would have to then implement to build that is listeners. So I'm building a listener API so that you can swap out what you use to do listening, especially listening with models. So I'd build two things. One would be like a more foundational listen API, and then one would be listening to a model, where you can easily say, for example, let me just show you what the code would look like for that. I don't know exactly yet, but something like this. Const, maybe like a boards listener is equal to use listener, or you might even call this use model listener, because it's not a normal listener. It's specifically listening to a model. And because of that, we can now do some nice typing, add in a bunch of assumptions. Then I would pass the board through there. And then you would have things like, change, or maybe something like this. You'd have like update or updated, or just like maybe a more global one, which is called changed. And then essentially you can create a really nice API for that, because you know that when you're using model listener, you're using VueModel. Since they're using VueModel, I know that they're using Pina ORM, which is what we use for that. And then we get all the nice typing because of the typing we get from Pina ORM. Yeah, so that would be really cool. Let me just go through a couple more of these before I finish up. An LMS, I've actually already done this. So creating a learning management system using VueModel. And another cool thing about this is all of these can be demoed very easily in production. So I can easily push this to something like Netlify. And again, you don't need a backend because IndexedDB is the backend. But again, you can swap out IndexedDB with your own backend. And that means that you can just go into this site, click around, share it with your employer to basically say, is this what you want to build? And then if they give you the okay, then you just pull my source code from this, and then you start configuring it so that it suits your application. So then you can come in here and say, oh, I want a different button instead of destroy, or I want to change the way that you select boards and stuff like that. You can then start basically configuring it to your heart's content. Another one I've got is a timer app, a booking app, webinar app, just a really simple way to basically create a site where you can, have webinars. A calendar app, which is kind of like a Google Calendar, so a simple re-implementation of something like Google Calendar that uses iCal. I think I might be able to do that using IndexedDB. I don't know yet, but if we can do that, then that would be really cool. Of course, a to-do app, inventory app for like tracking inventories in companies, forms app, kind of like Google Forms. And then there's a few other ones that I got in here, which are kind of weirder ideas and would take too long to explain. So yeah, that's the idea that I wanted to run by you all. So in a sentence, building about 20 apps next year using VueModel so that you can then take the code of those apps and re-implement it using your own backend. Yeah, I reckon it would be really cool. This is only possible because VueModel allows you to use different backends and allows you to use IndexedDB as a backend. So yeah, let me know what you think. I really want to see what people think about this, because if you guys think it's a great idea, then I'm going to go ahead and do it. I think I'm going to do it anyway, to be honest, because it would just be so much fun. I love creating new projects, and it would be so cool to have like 10 or 20 different projects. I'm going to aim for 20. Where we can all collaborate on them together and basically nitpick little things in the code and go, how can we make this easier? Another thing that I've noticed recently that I want to do, I noticed that we have a boards indexer, a board creator, a board destroyer. I want to be able to say, and it's using like use indexer, use creator, etc. I want to be able to say, for example, const board service, and then maybe say like use service or like use model, maybe, I'm not sure yet. And it basically manages the dance between all of these. And then what you would do, so you would send in board here. And then if you wanted to access the indexer directly, you'd say board service dot indexer dot, and then you can do whatever, is on side of the indexer, or creator dot, and then you can do anything that's associated with the creator. Yeah, so basically strips out the need to write a lot of this code. And then you could also do stuff like this. So I'd have to standardize the way we do a lot of things like on success. So you could say creator on success, for example, so you would have another level of nesting there. Or I'm thinking maybe we could say like on create success. So you could basically have both, and this could be sugar for common things that you often do. We could just essentially proxy that. I don't know, I'd have to think about it more. But yeah, that's one of the things that I've kind of thought it would be great to implement that, because all of this code will look a little bit easier. And now as a community, we can just keep knocking out these little things that basically slow us down so that we can build apps a lot faster and a lot more easily. I've found this to be so ridiculously easy to do, to build this boards application. I mean, honestly, all of the code is basically in these 2 pages here. So we've got the use board page. So that's the code for, being able to create boards, update, delete, organize boards, batch update boards. So if you edit lots of boards all at once, or lots of cards all at once. It's got a debouncer on that. So it will then do a batch update to those boards all at once when you're done sort of typing in. And yeah, and then that's use main layout. It's really not a lot of code. And I think we can do it even better. And that's the entirety of a Trello app. And then of course you've got your markup as well. But the markup at this point is so simple because it's just a bunch of Quasar stuff, and all the complexity sits inside of this view draggable app. And all it does is like check this out. I think this is so cool. All it does is models card group IDs, right? So the board has got a list of all of its card groups. So it just models that on this view draggable component. And when this updates, um, VueModel is smart enough to notice that update, and then with a debouncer, it then updates everything on the back end. Which means if you've got a few of these and you're constantly moving them around like this, right? You could have a debouncer of like half a second, for example, and then it waits till you're done updating, and then it goes ahead and like sends the request. So all of this stuff is really, really easy to do using VueModel. And that's because every time I hit these problems, I'm like, not good enough. I think we can do better. And if we do that as a community, I just think we could just do some wicked stuff. All right. Anyway, that's enough talking for now. Hope you enjoyed this one. And yeah, let me know what you think.